Bank manager tears up 16-year-old black girl's college check. Without knowing her mother is a millionaire CEO. The sound of paper being torn echoed through the bank like a gunshot. James Morrison, manager of the First National Bank's premium branch, had just destroyed a $45,000 check in front of a 16-year-old teenager, throwing the pieces in the trash with the disdain of someone discarding a piece of paper. "Girl, do you think I was born yesterday?" James growled, adjusting his Italian tie as he looked at the young woman with contemptuous eyes. "A girl like you, coming here with a check for that amount? It's obviously a forgery." Destiny Williams remained motionless, her brown eyes shining with a calmness that contrasted sharply with the situation. At 16, she had faced looks like that her whole life, but something about that Tuesday afternoon would be different. Very different. "Mr. Morrison," she said in a firm voice that surprised even the receptionist watching the scene, "this check is for my tuition at Harvard." It was signed by the Stevens Academic Foundation. James let out a cruel laugh that made other customers look in their direction. "Harvard? You? Look, young lady, I don't know where you got that paper, but I suggest you leave here before I call security and the police." What James didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, Destiny had become the youngest student accepted into Harvard's pre-med program with a full scholarship, something that only 5 people achieved annually nationwide. The check he had just torn up was the payment for administrative fees, sent by the university itself. Destiny took a deep breath, remembering her mother's words, "Honey, one day you will meet people who will try to belittle you just because of your color. When that happens, maintain your dignity. The truth always finds a way." She watched James put his phone away after taking a picture of the pieces of the check, probably to laugh with his colleagues later about yet another attempt at fraud. The 52-year-old man, with his arrogant posture and scornful smile, had no idea he was being filmed by the bank's own security cameras. "Can I have a copy of the security report?" Destiny asked calmly. "Report?" James scoffed. "What for?" "To show your cleaning lady mother that you tried to pull a fast one on the bank." Something cold passed through Destiny's eyes. It wasn't anger, it was determination. "My mother is not a cleaning lady, Mr. Morrison. But even if she were, that wouldn't change my right to be treated with respect." James rolled his eyes and motioned for the security guard to approach. "Escort this girl out. And the next time she shows up here, don't even let her pass the door." As she walked toward the exit, Destiny took out her cell phone and sent a quick message. "Mom, I need to talk to you urgently. Exactly what you said might happen has happened. But this time, they messed with the wrong daughter." Outside, she looked up at the imposing bank building, its mirrored windows reflecting the blue afternoon sky. For a moment, any observer might have thought she was defeated. But anyone looking closely would have noticed something different in her eyes. It wasn't sadness, it was the dangerous calm of someone who had just received all the ammunition needed for a war that the opponent didn't even know had begun. That night, an extraordinary meeting would be called. A meeting that would change not only James Morrison's life, but the entire culture of that bank. Because there are things in life you just don't do. And humiliating the wrong person's daughter is one of them. If you're enjoying seeing how injustice can awaken forces that no one imagined existed, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this story is just beginning, and what's coming next will show that underestimating people can be the most costly mistake of your life. 2 hours after the incident, James Morrison was still laughing as he showed his colleagues in the break room the photo of the torn pieces of the check. "You should have seen her face when I said I was going to call the police," he laughed, drinking his 3rd cup of coffee that afternoon. "These kids think they can fool us with any piece of paper printed at home." What James didn't know was that at that very moment, 3 floors above, First National Bank CEO Victoria Chun was receiving a call that would change everything. On the other end of the line, a calm, controlled voice said, "Ms. Chun, my daughter was humiliated at your branch today. I need to schedule an urgent meeting." Meanwhile, Destiny walked through the streets of downtown, her phone ringing incessantly. It was her Harvard advisor, Professor Janet Morrison, ironically, with the same last name as the man who had just destroyed her dreams. "Destiny, we were unable to process your enrollment. The payment was returned by the bank." "What happened?" "There was a misunderstanding, Professor," Destiny replied with a calmness that surprised even herself. "But it will be resolved soon. Very soon." The truth is that Destiny had learned early on to maintain her composure under pressure. At age 8, when other parents questioned her presence at the private school where she had won a scholarship, she heard her mother say, "Honey, people will try to diminish you your whole life. But remember, diamonds are formed under extreme pressure." At age 12, when teachers doubted her exceptional grades in chemistry, she simply studied harder and won the state science competition. At 14, when they said that a girl of her age and background would never get into Harvard, she redoubled her efforts and became the youngest candidate ever accepted into the university's pre-med program. Now, at 16, she was facing her biggest test yet. Back at the counter, James continued his performance for his colleagues. The best part was when she asked about a safety report, he mimicked a high-pitched, mocking voice. As if she were some important executive who needs official documentation. Sarah, the receptionist who had witnessed everything, frowned. "James, are you sure that check was fake?" The girl seemed very confident, and... "Sarah, I've been in this business for 20 years, James interrupted sharply. "I've learned to spot fraudsters at first glance. That girl is just another one trying to take advantage of the system." What James didn't realize was that Sarah had discreetly written down the incident report number and the exact time. Something about Destiny's dignity had impressed her, and she had a feeling that this story wasn't over yet. 3 blocks away, Destiny entered a coffee shop and opened her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she typed an email to the Stevens Academic Foundation, explaining the situation and requesting a duplicate check. But this time, she added a special line: "Please include an official letter of authentication and send it directly to the bank's president." She knew James Morrison would celebrate his victory for a few more hours. She would let him savor this moment of glory, because when the storm came, it would be devastating. At 6 p.m., James left the bank whistling, pleased with himself. He posted a photo on Instagram with the caption, "Another day protecting our institution from fraud attempts. Constant vigilance." He had no idea that this post would be used as evidence against him in the next 48 hours. Destiny arrived home at 6:30 p.m. to a modest 2-story house in the suburbs. But what any casual observer wouldn't notice were the details: the garden perfectly manicured by a professional landscaper, the discreet but sophisticated security system, and the 3 cars in the garage, including a Tesla Model S that her mother used only for important meetings. "How was your day, dear?" her mother asked, not looking up from the documents scattered on the dining room table. "Interesting," Destiny replied, kissing her mother's forehead. "I discovered today what you always told me about standing up to people who underestimate us." Her mother finally looked up, and for the first time that day, Destiny saw a dangerous gleam in her mother's eyes. "Oh dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "some lessons can only be learned the hard way. And something tells me that Mr. James Morrison is about to receive the most expensive education of his life." That night, while James Morrison slept peacefully, dreaming of his next promotion, 2 women worked quietly. One was a 16-year-old teenager, typing emails and organizing documents with the precision of a seasoned lawyer. The other was her mother, making calls to people in very high positions and scheduling meetings that would take place before dawn. Each new humiliation James had imposed only strengthened something within Destiny that he couldn't see, a determination inherited genetically and forged by years of overcoming challenges. What that arrogant man didn't know was that each act of contempt was writing his own resignation letter, and that underestimating the wrong daughter could be the most expensive mistake anyone could make in life. The next morning, James Morrison arrived at the bank with an even bigger smile on his face. He had slept well, dreaming of his future promotion to regional director. Over breakfast, he showed his wife the printout of the torn pieces of the check. "You should have seen her face when I said I was going to call the police," he laughed, sipping his premium coffee. "These people need to learn not to try to cheat us." What James didn't know was that, at that very moment, 3 blocks away, the cleaning lady he had mentioned with such contempt was sitting in a 50-square-meter meeting room on the top floor of the Williams Tech Solutions corporate building. Regina Williams, CEO and founder of one of the largest educational technology companies in the country, was finishing reviewing documents that would completely change James Morrison's life. "Mom," Destiny said, entering the executive room with 2 coffees, "I received confirmation from Harvard. They are sending a duplicate check directly to the bank president, along with an official letter of authentication signed by the dean." Regina smiled, but her eyes remained cold as ice. At 42, she had built an empire valued at $340 million, starting from scratch after becoming a single mother at 26. Destiny was her pride and joy, but also her greatest motivation to never again allow anyone to underestimate a Williams. Perfect, Regina replied, closing one of the contracts on the table. What about the meeting with Victoria Chen? Scheduled for today at 3 p.m. She seemed very interested when I mentioned that it was about discrimination against minors in financial institutions, Destiny said, sitting in the leather chair across from her mother's desk. Regina had met Victoria Chen 5 years ago at a conference for female executives. They had kept in touch professionally, but Victoria had no idea that the educational consultant Regina Williams, who occasionally sent emails, was actually the CEO of Williams Tech Solutions. She had kept this low profile on purpose. You never knew when discretion would come in handy. While mother and daughter calmly made their plans, James Morrison was at the bank enjoying the best day of his week. 3 important clients had praised his rigorous security after he told them about the previous day's attempted fraud. Sarah, the receptionist, just shook her head, annoyed at how he turned humiliation into a source of pride. James, Sarah called as he passed the counter, are you sure that girl was trying to defraud you? She seemed very confident, and... Sarah dear, James interrupted condescendingly, you need to develop more instinct for these things. I can spot fraudsters a mile away. That girl was a classic case. What James didn't notice was the man in the suit who had just entered the bank and overheard the entire conversation. Dr. Michael Roberts, a civil rights attorney, had been hired by Regina the previous morning. He discreetly photographed James's name tag and noted the time of the conversation. 2 hours later, Regina and Destiny were in Dr. Roberts' office, reviewing their legal strategy. We have racial discrimination, humiliation of a minor, destruction of property, and potentially defamation, Dr. Roberts listed, flipping through documents. With the bank's security cameras and the receptionist's testimony, we have a solid case. We don't just want a lawsuit, Doctor, Regina said firmly. We want this to serve as an example. No other child should go through what my daughter went through. Destiny, who had remained quiet, finally spoke up. James Morrison needs to understand that his actions have consequences. But more importantly, the bank needs to change its policies. Dr. Roberts smiled. It was rare to find clients as focused on social justice as they were on personal revenge. I have an idea, he said. What if, instead of just suing them, we offer them an alternative? A chance to do the right thing before this becomes public. At 2:30 in the afternoon, James was quietly eating lunch when he received a call from the president's secretary. Mr. Morrison? Ms. Chen needs to see you in her office immediately. It's about an incident yesterday. James frowned. Incident? What incident? He had saved the bank from an attempted fraud. Why would the CEO want to see him about that? Maybe it was to commend him personally. Yes, that must be it. He walked up to the top floor whistling softly, adjusting his tie. When he entered the president's office, Victoria Chen was sitting behind her desk with a serious expression he had never seen before. On her right was an elegant woman in a navy blue blazer whom he did not recognize. And on her left, Destiny Williams. James felt the blood freeze in his veins. The girl was there, wearing a simple white blouse and jeans, but there was something different about her posture. She no longer looked like an intimidated teenager. She looked dangerous. Mr. Morrison, please sit down, Victoria said in a voice that cut through the air like a blade. I need you to explain to me exactly what happened yesterday with this young lady. James looked around the room, his confidence rapidly evaporating. I just followed security protocol. The check looked suspicious and... The check, Destiny interrupted calmly, was for my tuition at Harvard. Pre-med program. I am the youngest student ever accepted in the history of the university. Victoria Chen opened a folder and slid some documents across the table. These are the proofs of the check's authenticity, sent directly from the Harvard dean's office. Along with a rather unpleasant letter questioning why one of their students was humiliated at our institution. James felt his hands begin to shake. He had made a terrible mistake. But he still didn't fully understand the gravity of the situation. That's when Regina Williams stood up and extended her hand to Victoria Chen. Victoria, thank you for seeing us so quickly. As I mentioned on the phone, situations like this can become quite problematic, if not handled properly. Victoria smiled for the first time since James had entered the room. Regina, I can't believe your daughter is the young lady in question. Mr. Morrison, she turned to him with fiery eyes. You have no idea who you just humiliated, do you? At that moment, James Morrison realized that he had underestimated not only a brilliant teenager, but an entire family that possessed resources and connections he could never have imagined. And as the tense silence hung in the room, a single question echoed in his terrified mind. If this was just a preliminary meeting, what else was to come? The truth was that Regina Williams had built her empire precisely for moments like this, to ensure that her daughter would never face the barriers she herself had faced. And now, for the first time in 16 years of overprotection, someone had crossed the red line she had drawn around destiny. James Morrison was about to discover that there are consequences in life that no bank management manual could prepare him to face. The silence in the room was broken when Victoria Chun turned on the 65-inch monitor on the wall. "Mr. Morrison, before we continue, I'd like you to watch something." The screen showed images from the bank's security cameras from the previous day. James watched in horror as his own performance was replayed in high definition, him tearing up the check, throwing the pieces in the trash, making dismissive gestures. The audio was crystal clear. "Girl, do you think I was born yesterday?" His own voice echoed through the executive office. "A girl like you, coming in here with a check for that amount?" James felt cold sweat trickle down his forehead. I didn't know I was being recorded with audio." "All of our branches have had a complete monitoring system for 2 years," Victoria replied coldly. "But that's just the beginning." Regina Williams stood up and walked to the panoramic window. "Mr. Morrison, allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Regina Williams, CEO and founder of Williams Tech Solutions. You may be familiar with our company. We developed the bank security systems you just discovered record audio." James's face drained of color. Williams Tech Solutions had a $340 million contract with banking networks across the country. He had heard the company's name hundreds of times, but had never connected it with the cleaning lady he had mentioned with such contempt. "Impossible," James muttered, his voice coming out as a hoarse whisper. Victoria opened another file on the computer. "Here are the financial records. Regina Williams owns 12% of First National Bank through her investment holding company. She is our third largest individual shareholder." Destiny watched calmly as James Morrison crumbled before her eyes. "Mr. Morrison," she said in a calm voice, "I want you to know that your reaction yesterday was nothing new to me. At age 8, a principal told me that girls like me didn't have the intellectual capacity for advanced programs. At 12, a teacher claimed that I had probably cheated on my chemistry test. At 14, a vocational counselor suggested I be more realistic about my academic goals." James tried to speak, but only an incoherent noise came out of his throat. "But you know what's interesting?" Destiny continued. "Each of those people had to eat their words when the results came in. The advanced program I didn't have the ability to do. I graduated at the top of my class. The chemistry test I cheated on. I won the state competition the following year. The unrealistic goals? Well, here we are." Regina returned to the table and opened a folder. "Victoria, as you know, our company has strict policies on discrimination. When an employee of a partner institution commits blatant acts of discrimination against my family, it becomes a business issue." Victoria nodded gravely. "I understand perfectly, Regina. Therefore," Regina continued, "I would like to propose a solution that benefits everyone involved, except those who have shown themselves unworthy of such consideration." James finally managed to speak. "Please, I made a mistake. I can explain." "Can you explain how you called my daughter a fraud without any investigation?" Regina asked calmly. "Can you explain how you assumed I was a cleaning lady based solely on prejudice? Can you explain how you destroyed an official Harvard document out of pure racial prejudice?" Dr. Roberts, the lawyer who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Mr. Morrison, I have here a civil suit for racial discrimination, humiliation of a minor, destruction of property, and moral damages in the amount of $2.3 million. I can file this in 2 hours if necessary." James felt his legs buckle. His annual salary of $85,000 would never cover compensation of that amount. His house, his savings, everything would disappear. "However," Regina said, watching James sweat profusely, "as I mentioned, I have an alternative proposal." Victoria leaned forward, interested. "First, James Morrison will be terminated immediately for cause, losing all benefits and receiving a permanent note on his professional record regarding racial discrimination. Second, First National Bank will implement a mandatory anti-racism training program for all employees, funded by my company. Third, the bank will create a $500,000 scholarship fund for low-income black students, administered by our foundation. James opened his mouth to protest, but Victoria raised her hand. The alternative, she said coldly, is to face a lawsuit, a federal investigation for discrimination in a financial institution, and the national publicity that will surely follow when the story of how a bank manager humiliated the daughter of the CEO who saved his bank reaches the media. At that moment, James Morrison realized the true extent of his mistake. He hadn't just humiliated a brilliant teenager, he had attacked the family of the woman whose financial decisions could make or break his bank. He had thrown his career away out of pure prejudice. "I accept the terms," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. Regina smiled for the first time since she had entered the room. "Excellent. Victoria, can you arrange the documentation?" As James signed his resignation letter with trembling hands, Destiny approached him one last time. "Mr. Morrison, I hope that one day you will understand that the problem was never that I didn't look like someone who deserves respect. The problem is that you forgot that all people deserve respect, regardless of their appearance." 20 minutes later, James Morrison walked through the bank parking lot for the last time, carrying a box with his personal belongings. Inside was the photo he had taken of the pieces of the check, now a bitter reminder of how prejudice had destroyed his career in less than 24 hours. Outside the building, he saw Regina and Destiny getting into a Tesla Model S. For the first time, he noticed the details he had overlooked: the discreet Rolex watch on Regina's wrist, the latest generation notebook Destiny was carrying, the confident posture of two women accustomed to success. As he watched the car drive away, James Morrison realized he had learned the most expensive lesson of his life: never judge a book by its cover, especially when you have no idea how many chapters that book contains. But was it too late to apply that lesson, and can some bridges, once burned by prejudice and arrogance, never be rebuilt? 6 months later, Destiny Williams walked through the historic halls of Harvard in her immaculate white lab coat, carrying anatomy books that weighed as much as her responsibilities as the youngest pre-med student in the university's history. At just 17 years old, she had not only survived her first semester, she was among the top 10 students in her class. "Destiny," called Professor David Chun, head of the molecular biology department. "I need to talk to you about your research on genetics and racial disparities in medicine." It was the same research she had begun, inspired by the humiliation at the bank, a study of how medical biases affect diagnoses and treatments. The work was attracting national attention, and 3 universities had already offered her scholarships for her graduate studies. Meanwhile, 1,000 miles away, James Morrison woke up in his one-bedroom apartment in a run-down neighborhood of the city. At 53, he worked as a cashier at a local supermarket, earning $12 an hour, less in a month than he used to earn in a day as a bank manager. The permanent note in his professional record about racial discrimination had made it impossible for him to get any position in financial institutions. 3 job interviews had ended the moment recruiters discovered his past. The house that had taken him 15 years to pay off had been sold to cover lawyers in labor lawsuits that had piled up after his dismissal. "James, can you cover cash register 3? Shouted his supervisor, a woman 20 years younger than him. She didn't even bother to use "sir" to her. He was just another disposable employee who had apparently lost his way in life. During breaks, James would sometimes Google news about Williams Tech Solutions. Regina's company had grown 340% in the last year, expanding into international markets. She regularly appeared on lists of the country's most influential CEOs, lecturing on educational technology and diversity in the workplace. The cruelest irony? The supermarket where James worked had recently implemented a security system developed by Williams Tech Solutions. Every time he swiped his card to clock in, he discreetly saw the logo of the company he had inadvertently helped propel to even greater success. First National Bank, under new management influenced by Regina's proposed changes, had become a national model for financial inclusion. The anti-racism training program was being studied by other institutions, and the scholarship fund had already benefited 127 low-income black students. Sarah, the former receptionist who witnessed Destiny's humiliation, now headed the bank's customer service department. In an interview with a business magazine, she commented, "Sometimes someone has to pay the price for institutional ignorance so that we can all learn." James Morrison taught us, in the worst possible way, how prejudice can destroy not only innocent lives, but entire careers built on rotten foundations. Victoria Chun, the bank's CEO, had become one of the leading advocates for diversity in the financial sector. During a gala dinner where she received an award for inclusive leadership, she mentioned, "Sometimes the greatest transformations are born out of the most painful moments." A 16-year-old girl taught us that judging people by their appearance is not only morally wrong, it's economically foolish. Destiny, watching the speech online from her dorm room at Harvard, smiled as she saw Regina being given a standing ovation by an audience of more than 500 executives. Her mother had turned a moment of personal injustice into a national crusade for equality. On her desk, next to her medical books, Destiny kept a framed photo, her and Regina on high school graduation day, smiling in front of the Harvard gate. On the back of the frame, a note in cursive, "To my daughter, who taught me that dignity is priceless and justice has no expiration date." 3 years had passed since that afternoon on the bench. Destiny was now in her 3rd year of medical school, specializing in pediatric cardiology. Her research on racial disparities in medicine had resulted in protocol changes in hospitals in 5 states. James Morrison still worked at the supermarket. At 56, he had developed arthritis in his hands from working so hard scanning products. His former colleagues at the bank occasionally ran into him in the cereal aisle, always looking away in shame, less for him than for themselves for laughing when he humiliated a teenager who would become one of the country's most promising doctors. The story had spread on social media as an example of how prejudice can backfire on those who practice it. Destiny never posted about the incident, but others did. A TikTok video called "How a Racist Bank Manager Destroyed His Own Career in 5 Minutes" had over 3 million views. In the end, James Morrison tried to humiliate a brilliant young woman because of the color of her skin and ended up humiliating only himself. Destiny learned that true justice is not to fight fire with fire, it is to shine so brightly that even the blind can see your light. The best revenge is not to destroy those who tried to diminish you. It is to build such impressive success that they themselves realize how small they always were. Sometimes life puts prejudiced people in our path not to teach us humility, but to show us that our greatness never depended on their approval. If this story of transformation and justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that underestimating someone can be the most costly mistake you make in life. And remember, never judge a book by its cover, because you may find that you are rejecting a masterpiece.